in deciding whether to or not to engage in that activity. It is not the government's role to make those decisions for its citizens. In fact, it's government's overreach in reaction to the coronavirus that actually created widespread damage to individuals and businesses by closing them down unnecessarily. Some of the damage is irreparable, as businesses that took decades to build will never recover. There's a new report out in the Wall Street Journal. It says in an August survey by the Pacific Business Group on Health that 57% of major U.S. employers said they'd postponed return-to-work plans because of recent bumps in the coronavirus infections and the numbers that don't add up. And one catalyst for that flip-flop, many school districts announced plans for remote or hybrid learning, throwing a protractor into the working parents' plan to return to the office. And another factor, running an office is going to be much costlier due to the pandemic. I'm sure you guys have had to make some changes at your workplace.
Oh, absolutely. It's been an absolute hellhole. And, you know, the worst part is you can see it. People so aggravated, so aggressive towards our employees who are just doing their jobs. We don't make these rules. Okay, that's something you have to understand. You can't yell at employers or attack employers for following the rules of their mandates. We don't want to lose our jobs either. We have to feed our families too. Okay, and all of this is just creating further divisiveness in order to keep us, again, at each other's throats, because a unified America is a dangerous America in the eyes of the government.
Absolutely. And you hit it right on the head there. Companies are hesitating to bring employees back to the office because they're concerned about the legal liability. You know, who's going to sue who? In certain cases, the government gives advice. They have things on cigarettes requiring the packaging of cigarettes to include a warning is an example. Look, advising citizens to evacuate in the path of a fire. That's another recommendation, right? They can give us all the recommendations. We appreciate it. The flu shot is a third. However, each citizen is free to choose whether or not to follow that advice. Not now. We're forced to wear these masks everywhere we go, or we can't go in. What's going to happen when that happens with the vaccine? We're given no such choice. And from what I'm hearing, Virginia is saying that they will mandate the vaccine. No choice.
It's terrifying.
Get used to that.
The media has created a terrifying narrative, having mentioned this virus 2.1 billion times just by the end of March.
Another episode and sadly another week of maddening proof that the media continues to only give their narrative. They suppress stories to the American people by just straight up not reporting them. There's a plethora of new studies and scientific information out there on the reopening of schools.
More evidence shows that reopening schools does not pose a significant risk to children or teachers when it comes to the COVID-19 virus.
But you won't hear about them because the studies don't incite fear.
Keeping schools closed down is an untenable prospect, and if this administration is going to stand for anything, it's going to be standing against child abuse, which reporting falls when schools are closed. It's going to be standing for educational equality, because as noted by McKinsey and Company, I was reading some very detailed studies today that learning loss will probably be greatest if schools stay closed among low-income Black and Hispanic students. This president fights for school choice. He fights for opportunity, and he'll fight for schools to stay open.
Today, the media is trying to deceive Americans on a scale that threatens the country itself, attacking our president for wanting to open schools, which most think we should, by lying and misrepresenting complex issues and situations. They have purposely sown division and fear.
There's certain data that's very controversial about masks, and I think the president said it correctly, honestly, when he said that in certain settings it's reasonable to wear a mask when you cannot social distance, and particularly if you're trying to protect a proximity to a high-risk individual or you are a high-risk individual. And I think that's a rational policy.
Their attacks on the institutions, the rule of law, justice, along with blatant attacks on the freedom of the press from Facebook and Twitter. And they ridicule and they attack anyone who thinks differently, or they try to bully anyone that criticizes Black Lives Matter or the narrative of fear.
And the reality is it's stemming from a massive amount of fear bordering on hysteria now. And this is a real problem because public policy is supposed to be taking into consideration not just stopping COVID-19 at all costs, but understanding the impact of people on what you do and what you say. And I think that's been a failure in some of the people who have been speaking out on this.
The media itself continued to drive this divide into an already fragile societal pandemic by using culture and government-driven explosions to the forefront for nothing more than a narrative of fear. There's so many Americans who are pissed off right now, not only at this bullshit narrative of fear and the continuing exploits of Democrats, but also at Donald Trump, some of whom voted for Donald Trump. And they're disappointed, not so much in his policies or what he's been able to accomplish while under fire, but because he just won't soften up. But here's Mike Huckabee earlier this month, who put some perspective on it.
He has deregulated so much government so that the businesses of America can thrive, and they have until this COVID stuff happened. This is a president who has stood up to the globalist, stood up to the unfair trade practices, brought back American jobs, has done more for minorities than any president in my lifetime in actually helping people to have good, decent jobs and a future. This is a president who has reformed criminal justice. There's an incredibly long litany of things he's done. And some of them say, but I don't like his personality. Well, get over it. This is not about electing a personality. This isn't Hollywood. This is the rough, tumble world of politics. And maybe he's not as genteel as some of us would like. But by gosh, he's getting the job done. And it's time Republicans rally, because if they don't, they're going to get Joe Biden.
And I agree. Let's be honest. Americans do expect our president to be a problem solver, not a problem creator. And he does that from time to time. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
He just won't soften the tone at all. However, when he does, it doesn't even get reported on. There was great things last week with Big Pharma, barely mentioned. They nearly cut all pharmacy prescriptions in half. Instead, we were given their self-serving deception of the Trump administration versus the Postal Department all week. Seriously? We should be able to go out and vote. Absentee balloting is already a thing, people, everywhere, in every state. So if you feel at risk and you fall under certain risk criteria, well then stay home. Ask for an absentee ballot, fill it out, and mail it in. Okay? Why is this an issue to close our most trusted and coveted of rights to go out and vote? Yet, come on out and force feed those poker machines. Your stimulus checks, bring them on in. We'll cash them. Smoke, drink, and gamble. But don't go vote. Let's just open polling places at our casinos here, Killian. Everybody'd show up, right?
They would.
So hypocritical. So why the fuss? Because whatever it takes to win is where they're heading. Whatever it takes to win or cause enough confusion and more divisiveness. We're fighting over the Postal Service right now. At all costs. And we don't have to. You don't want to go out and vote. You feel you're unsafe? Then get an absentee ballot. It's that easy. And every state has one. It's clear, especially after watching the DNC. It wasn't about ideology. It was not. It was not about politics. It was about one man. They do not like President Trump. They want him out, man. My thought is if you can stand your ass in line like you do at Walmart and Costco and Home Depot and the casino and the hotels and the restaurants. Oh, by the way, where for 20 minutes you're allowed to take off your mask and eat because COVID doesn't travel while you eat, Killian.
Interesting how it picks and chooses when to travel.
That 30 minutes that you're sitting at the table, it does not travel.
How polite.
Yes.
At least it has manners.
Yes, it does. You can reasonably get to the voting booth without mass hysteria, people, because the Predator Media is still inciting fear. How do they do that? They can become powerful through deception. Predators don't adhere to social norms. How does a democracy, or how should a democracy, deal with predators? Well, I guess it would depend on just how bad the predator is, right? But I think we can agree that predators do not belong in public office. And if you can't see whom this predator is trying to put there, well then, well, you've stopped listening by now anyway. The only way we protect ourselves from a predator whom invades our home night after night and day after day with false narratives and misinformation is to strengthen our own critical thinking by examining who, what, and why are they telling me this, and why aren't they telling me this? All you got to do is a little critical thinking, a little bit of research. And, another thing, we also have to adhere to the Constitution and not allow our constitutional rights to be taken away so easily. This upcoming election is the opportunity to demonstrate our resilience and avoid being manipulated by this predator called the mainstream media. Don't be a victim of misinformation and one-sided viewpoints. Educate yourself. Make it harder for them. For a predator, sustaining deception's hard work. If you don't believe me, just ask hardcore left Democrats Epstein and Madoff. People, in order to create an actual legitimate public conversation with the media, with business, with government, with sports, with entertainment, and with your community, it means that we've got to find a way to connect our principles of democracy with practical and rational efforts that connect with capitalism today as we know it. We have to ensure long-standing efforts are worked on maintaining some kind of legitimate public dialogue. There's so many people in the dark or with their heads buried in the sand, or are Democrats because their parents were, and Republicans because they don't really know but their grandpa told them to be, and libertarians because, their uncle isn't, they love him. We need to educate ourselves of why you're voting for who and what. This study scared me. 70% of millennials in a recent study said they'd be somewhat or extremely likely to vote for a socialist candidate, according to a recent YouGov poll. Look no further than the millennials' debt loads and stagnant wages to see why they're embracing socialism. We really need to develop some kind of nonpartisan civic education process across our educational system that, in the interests of having a truly informed citizen, will include sorting through our different ideological character. If we don't, then we just continue to deny our own reality, allowing the contradictions, the confusion, and the police state of doublethink to flourish and prosper, and you can say goodbye to the good old US of A. To let this happen would be shameful, to say the very least. It betrays our hard work, our good fortune as Americans, and allows us to completely forget that our spirit of knowing that we have always had to rely on one another for our collective prosperity. Always. For the sake of all of us, despite your party affiliation, despite your color, your religion, amid our troublesome times, it's not about politics at this point. It's about educating ourselves as to what is really happening, because we can no longer trust our predator media. Educate yourselves. Some of us won't believe it till we read it. Some of us won't believe it until we research it ourselves. I get that. But now is the time to do just that. We must make the call for better understanding of our country a national priority. What's really happening and why. And most importantly, let's make the call for a better understanding of one another. For our children and our grandchildren who are soon going to be here. They are depending on it. This is Chad Hardy, keeping it real.